Time to fix something. The Silverado has a misfire on cylinder number 1. He changed the spark plug and the wire. Didn't make any difference at all. So I'm going to show you the fastest, easiest way to figure out what the heck is going on. We're going to start with, of all things, a thermal imager. This Doge phone, a Chinese something, I'm trying it out. It has it built in and it works quite well, as you're going to see. It makes a beautiful thermal image. Well, it may look cool, but you can actually use it for something. Now, first of all, we can see all the cylinders there, about the same temperature and the same color. 338. It keeps telling you it's getting too hot, it can damage the thing, but 330. They're all about the same. Then we'll go to the other side of the engine, and we'll look at that. And that's pretty much the same. It's all yellow and about the same temperature. These things are really handy, not just for looking at exhaust temperature. Say you got an electrical short. You just follow the wires. You get to the part that's hot, you know, that's where the short is. Man, they're really handy for analyzing stuff. And they got so cheap, this particular one came with the phone. It's called InfiRay. You turn it on. You can take pictures of it, and it does spot temperature readings too. So you can tell if one's yellow, one's blue, you know, blue's cooler, but it shows you the actual temperature. In this case, it's not an obvious thing. It's not like it's flooding out with gas. It's not firing at all. It's not an obvious thing. So, next, we'll get to the computer. Okay, we'll plug it in. And while we're letting it control itself here, this was built in Fort Wayne, Indiana in 2004. Now, it is the V6 engines, and unfortunately, they often have a lower lifespan than this baby. Has 141,000 miles. So let's look at the data. We'll start with something simple. It's not going 3,100. It's more like 800, so it moves, but it's broken. Do auto diagnose. Go through all the systems. Here we go. But it's still got 24 subsystems to go through. But it's got a nice back on here. He just bought it as a work truck for $5 grand. On the radio code, we don't care about that. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in figuring out why it's misfiring on cylinder number 1. He tried spark plug wire. Spark plug wasn't that. There's a lot of things that it can be. It isn't necessarily the spark. It could be the fuel injection system. It could even be a blowing head gasket or a computer failure problem. So we start with the data. Always start with the data. Now I do notice I can feel it shaking at idle. When I rev it up a little, it clears up quite a bit. So we're going to look at the data after we look at the codes. So we'll do diagnosis. We don't care about the radio. He's not worried about that. We care about why it's not running right. So we'll go to the powertrain and we'll see what the code is. Read the trouble code. Trouble code. It's probably the misfire. Here we go. Engine misfire. Last test passed, this passed, and then it failed. Before it passed, and it failed. Now he said he had misfire on cylinder number 1. This is different. This is PO300. That is random intermittent misfire. So it's misfiring all lots of different places. So let's look at the raw data. We'll go to live data. Engine live data. That's what we want. Start with data 1. They are color coded. We're going to start looking through all this stuff. See if anything looks odd. Short-term fuel trim, both banks. 3, 2, now it's 0. That's not bad. Doesn't seem to be an injector-related problem. That's not way off. Although, here we have something. The long-term fuel trim on bank 1, and he said it had misfire on number 1 before, is -6. It's subtracting fuel from bank 1. It's adding a tiny bit on bank 2, but bank 1, it's subtracting fuel. For some reason, too much fuel is getting into bank 1, causing a misfire. Now, I see this all the time. Watch. It's shaking there. Now I rev it up. The misfire is completely gone. Let's say you have a fuel injector that's clogged or dripping fuel. If it drips too much fuel, it will make it run too rich and it'll subtract fuel. So it could be a fuel injection problem by actually adding too much fuel on bank 1. We'll look further and see what other information we can get. Now you can see on bank 1, the average injector is 4.14 milliseconds. On bank 2, it's 4.49 milliseconds. Now, the computer tries to make it work perfect. Bank 2 is the one that wasn't subtracting fuel. Bank 1 is subtracting fuel, but bank 1 has an average of shorter spray time. See, now it's 3.97. This is a longer spray time. This is the one that has more problems. You would think this is spraying less, this is spraying more, but the one that's spraying less is actually running a bit on the rich side. It's subtracting fuel. Easily could be a problem with the injectors. on that side of the engine, because you'd think they're firing for a shorter period so less fuel would go in. Well, it's deliberately making them fire that. If it has a leaking injector or injector that's kind of dribbling along and it thinks, oh God, it's getting too much fuel, I'll fire it for a shorter period of time. That's how it makes it rich or lean. It makes the injectors fire for a shorter period of time so less fuel is injected. And that's the side that's subtracting fuel. So that side of the engine, definitely something squirrely. So let's look at fuel trim. There's more data we can look at. And again, bank 1 is firing a shorter period of time than bank 2. Now let's look at misfires. Since it's misfiring, we'll look at that data. The misfire is cylinder number 1. It's showing 18, 20 misfires. All the other cylinders are not showing any misfire. So even though it had random intermittent misfire code this time, it's only cylinder number 1 is the one that's doing the misfire. And we look at the history, 50,457 misfires. The others are just random. We don't care about them. We know it's only cylinder number 1 that's doing all the misfiring. It's the front one. So it could be fuel injector's dirty, could be the fuel injector's bad, or the worst thing, which unfortunately these engines are notorious for, is a head gasket that's starting to blow on that particular cylinder. So, first we're going to do a compression test. We'll take out the number 1 spark plug here. So let's look at it. First we're going to analyze it. And you can see the white's still white. It hasn't discolored. It hasn't driven it much. But it's not covered with burnt carbon or anything. That's a good sign. It looks like it normally should look. And when I smell it, it doesn't particularly smell of raw gas or anything. So we're going to do a compression reading of this cylinder. And since the owner's here, it's easier. We're just going to use the one you're pushing. He's going to crank it, and I'll push it in. So push it in here. Okay, crank it over again. Okay. Now looking good. Okay, it's only 90 pounds. So let's check another cylinder. Realize compression tests are relative. These aren't extremely accurate for the actual PSI, but it's relative to itself. It's going to give, say they were all 90, you'd know, well, it's worn, but that's not the problem. We're going to check another cylinder and see what that pressure is. So we'll go to the other side and we'll check the pressure on this side. Again, we'll pull out a spark plug. That was a fun job. This one's been in there quite a bit longer. Now you can see it's still a normal color. It's not outrageous. It's older than the other one is, but it's not particularly foul with carbon, and the white's white. It's as it should go. But we're going to check the pressure now. We have like 130 pounds. Now he's not losing coolant. It doesn't overheat. So this is just plain wear inside. I can't say truthfully whether the head gasket's starting to leak or the piston rings are worn, but regardless, the engine isn't sealing like it's supposed to seal. An engine is basically a giant air pump. It sucks in air, then it burns it with gasoline, and then it shoves the burnt gas out the exhaust. So it's actually a giant air pump that instead of you pumping it, it's pumping the energy by burning gasoline. And when the compression of one is 40 pounds less than the other, there's wear inside. You'd have to rebuild the engine either way. It doesn't really matter. And in these, a lot of guys won't touch these engines because they say they're not rebuildable. There's too much money needs to be put in them to run them right. Unfortunately, he's got a worn engine here. Now, it is changing the fuel trim quite a bit. So we're going to try one thing. We're going to try Bernie's fuel cleaner. It's amazing stuff. Then we'll see what the fuel trim is after we take it on about a half-hour drive. Bernie's stuff isn't a miracle, but it works quite well for cleaning. It's not going to fix a totally worn out engine, but this fuel injector cleaner, we're going to see if the fuel trims change after we drive it around and make it run a little bit better. Because like I said, it's the idle that you feel it. On the highway you don't feel anything. It runs perfectly good. It's just the problem that's starting up. It's not going to fix the compression of the engine, but on the other hand, this is a secondary vehicle for him. See with the thing on the top, he's using it to carry a camper. Now unfortunately the camper weighs like 7,000 pounds. He should have got the V8 with it. He's got the 6. But it's not something that he's going to be driving 20,000 miles a year. If he can baby it along, and he also isn't taking it to go camping in California from Massachusetts either. So, you keep it local, you never know. But we're going to see if Bernie's cleaner at least makes it stop running so rich on that number 1 side. Okay, now our ride is up. It seems to be running so much smoother. We'll get the data and see what happened. Okay, now, realize one thing. Kind of a toy. He uses it to take his camper to the beach. Now, he goes from like Fall River to Horseshoe Bay and stuff, all short drives, 20, 30 miles. It's not that far. He just wants something that's going to last, and it runs good. Gets like 25 miles a gallon on the highway. Still running good. Let's see if Bernie's Cleaner changed the fuel trim at all to make it run less rich on bank number 1. And lo and behold, check it out. The long-term fuel trim of bank 1 that was subtracting like 6% fuel is now subtracting 1.6% fuel. Instead of subtracting 6% fuel, now it's minus 1.6. And granted, we only drove the thing around for like 40, 45 minutes. Might get better as time goes on. You could always upgrade it if you wanted, but for his $5,000, hey, it's running good. He knows now what the misfire is. He doesn't have to start tearing his hair out looking for this or that. It's just because the engine is worn more on cylinder number 1, but 25 miles a gallon on the highway, runs as good as it does, and now it's not running as rich thanks to Bernie's Cleaner. Hey, you can easily do, look, the tools that I use cost you maybe less than $100. Learn how to do the stuff yourself, get my knowledge, save yourself a ton. And sure, you're not going to put an engine in a vehicle, but you might say, well, when this goes out, I'll find a guy to do it. New, used, whatever you want to put in. And you don't have to worry that someone's going to pull a fast one on you. You know enough knowledge that, hey, it's good, it's solid, I'll put some money into it. I won't be throwing my money into an endless money pit, or I might not even need to do something, like he's not going to do anything except drive it now because it runs good enough. He's got 2 other cars he uses for regular transportation, and hey, it could still last years and years. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.